in business.
Yes, sir.
And thank you everybody for turning out today. It looks like a great crowd, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion. Um, Pastor Dumisani Washington and I have known each other for now 10 years. Would you believe it?
I didn't know how long. I knew it'd been a while, Rabbi, but I wasn't sure how long.
10 years ago, you were sporting dreads,
Yes, sir. That was a while ago. Yes, sir.
and I don't think we either of us had as much gray down here.
Yes, sir.
And
We've added
Pastor
some gray, actually.
Washington was you were director of diversity for Christians United for Israel. I was at the Christians United for Israel conference, and that was great. And sometime later, how long ago did you form or did you leave for IBSI?
I returned to IBSI in May of 21. I actually formed it before joining Kufi, but yeah, I returned in May of 21.
Institute for Black Solidarity for Israel. Um, and we'll come go into that conversation, but the most recent time when the pastor and I met each other was just last week at the first ever Judeo-Christian Zionist conference, where Pastor Washington was an invited speaker and I was an invited guest. And actually, what happened was due to a little bit of confusion with the hotel and hotel exit times and the reservation, I had to be out packing out of my room when the break, they called the end of the break a little bit early, I think is what happened. And so Pastor Washington was about to be up, and I said, you know what, Pastor, I'm going to ask you to start with reprising your comments to the Judeo-Christian Zionist conference last week, because that way I can go back out of the room and it'll be new to me like it is new to everybody else here.
Sure.
So, without any further ado, I want to ask Pastor Washington to go ahead, say his introductory remarks, and remind us, quote unquote. Well, no, remind himself what he said at the Judaism Christian Zionist conference last week. Thanks so much.
Rabbi Menken, thank you, sir. And my apologize to you and to everyone. My apologies to you and everyone. I'm a little late. I was trying to log in, and the prompt kept taking me in a little circle, so I had to try again. So it took me a couple of minutes. So again, my apologies. I know that everyone's time is valuable. So yeah, that's Rabbi's story. He's sticking to it. The real reason that he didn't want to hear me speak, so he figured he would leave. I'm just joking. Uh, we are so yeah, we were together there. My friend Caleb Myers from Israel set up the Judeo-Christian Zionist Congress. We were fortunate enough to be on the steering committee, so we've known about it for a while. So we were pleased that everything seemed to go well. Please remember Caleb in your prayers. He got a little sick. He's still there in Israel. He's supposed to go back to Israel, but he was in Nashville still. He had a little bit of
Oh.
a staph infection, if you will, and so he had to go get some antibiotics. He's doing better, so we know that it's a lot of warfare. So my comment, I don't remember what I was asked to speak on. I know what I spoke on. I don't remember what I was asked to speak on. The main thing that I emphasize to everyone, and then Rabbi, you let me know where we need to go if you want to do Q&A. And I don't know if you wanted to record this, Rabbi. I see that it's not recording. I'm just notice that it's there. That's I don't know if you all want to do that. It's completely up to you. Um, I had
According to me, I've got a recording thing going on.
is
So
it
it
going there?
claims.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
at
Okay,
my
yeah, there.
end, it claims.
Okay, cool. All right, yes, sir. So what I spoke on, and for those of you, the conference it was a wide array of topics, all related to Zionism, the Judeo-Christian foundations of Western civilization, obviously, especially concerning the United States of America, where we are right now, the rising tide of Jew hatred, Israel hatred, America hatred, what's happening on both the left and right sides of the aisle. It's somewhat unprecedented now. And what we are actually seeing a unified voice. Now, it's not unprecedented where our Jewish brothers and sisters are concerned. They've seen left, right, center coming for them for thousands of years. This is not new. Unfortunately, in this nation, which will be 250 years young this July, if something doesn't change, obviously, we're not going to see 255. This is what's happening now. And so, what I spoke on in this time that I had was about the Christian persecution. I was talking about it from the standpoint of a couple of different things. Number one, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, we formed this organization in 2013 after my first trip to Israel in 2012, which was Hanukkah of 2012. I was a guest with the African American pastors group of the Christians United for Israel. I was not serving with that organization yet. I served with them for almost 7 years, started a couple of years later, but I was there as a guest. Was nobody special or anything, just one of the pastors who was fortunate enough to be picked. And short version of the story is that at the Western Wall, I just felt God really lay on my heart to start this work that strengthens the ties between Africa and Israel, and then the Black and Jewish communities, the diaspora, whether it's the United States or around the world. And we have been finding ourselves attempting to do that work since that time, some almost 13 years now. Christian persecution is very much related to this, which is what I was addressing. In that, for Christian supporters of Israel, now I'm specifically talking about the United States, but around the world. For Christian supporters of Israel, there are two tracks, and Rabbi, this is what I was telling them on that day, that we approach. Number one is the biblical, right? We talk about whether it's Genesis 12, whether it's Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. The biblical mandate of what it is to be a Zionist, right? I know Tucker Carlson and others really, really struggle with this because their brains are kind of small, but a Christian Zionist is simply someone who believes what the Bible says about Zion, which is a Bible word. Zion is not a political word. Zion became a political ideology, obviously the quest for a homeland and establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people. But again, Zion is actually synonymous with Jerusalem. Anyway, the liberation, if you will, of the Jewish people. But we said that, and along with that, as Christian pastors, especially clergy, those of us who are leaders in the body of Christ, our job also commanded in Scripture, according to Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3, we are to remember those that are in chains, as if bound with them. We, as Christians, are commanded by the apostles to remember, to actively remember, and remember, not just remember in terms of thought, but to actively pursue the good of those fellow parishioners, those fellow faith sharers, if you will, who are being persecuted, right? This is something that we are commanded to do. There's even an example of it in the book of Acts where it wasn't even a persecution. It was the church that was in Jerusalem. They were suffering because there was a famine. And so they took up an offering and they sent it there to take care of them. That we are taught by the apostles to actively care for other members of the church. So of course, that would mean that at this time in the 2,000-year history of the church has never known the persecution in terms of numbers that it knows now. Thousands slaughtered who are Christians every year in different parts of Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of the world. Right now, for example, Nigeria is the most dangerous place to be a Christian. Even on its quote-unquote better years, 4,000 to 5,000 would be killed a year. We are now up to over 7,000 killed every year in Nigeria alone. That does not count Syria, does not count Afghanistan, does not count Iraq. It doesn't count also in Syria where our Druze and Kurdish and other brothers and sisters of other different faiths that are non-Sunni Muslim that are being killed. Like never before, there's a slaughter of men, women, and children and enslavement. Much of the Arab enslavement of Africans that happens in different parts of the region in the Middle East are enslaved intentionally of Christians. Now, there are African Muslims who are also enslaved, but the vast majority of those that are enslaved are Christians. So my comments were that we, as those who stand with Israel, both biblically and then in a very, very practical sense, the freest place in the entire region for Christians and other non-Muslims would be Israel. The freest Muslims on the planet live in Israel. You can worship, you can sing, you can enjoy, you can dance. Nobody cares. You can walk around with a cross, walk around with a hijab, whatever. Nobody cares. Nobody cares because there's freedom that's there. You want to go to a mosque one day, you want to go to a synagogue the next day. That's what it is in Israel. The fastest growing church in terms of nation happens to be Iran. Those of you who didn't know it, people are coming to faith in Jesus in Iran faster than any other nation. The fastest region that is growing in terms of Christianity would be sub-Saharan Africa, which is one of the things that's happening when we do in our organization, which I'll talk some more about that, I'm sure, at some point. So those were my comments, and then I went in like I kind of do. I learned this from my parents. They of blessed memory. My mom had a big mouth, and she said what she was thinking. You put that on me hanging around my Israeli friends. That can be downright obnoxious. I'm gonna tell you what I'm thinking, whether you like it or not, whether you want to hear about it or not. Right? So I'm on the stage. You give me the microphone. I'm gonna talk. And one thing we talked about is the fact that Christians are being slaughtered on our watch as Christian Zionists, while most of the church remains silent. And we said silence regardless to who may be offended. We talked about the fact that during just one example, because I told you already, our organization started in 2013, which would have been politically under the administration of the second term of the Obama administration. We took the Obama administration to task over, among other things, its role in the genocide of Christians in Nigeria. We have all of the receipts. We told people to go to our website. They can read an article that's called Blood on Our Hands. The Obama administration's role in ushering in Muhammadu Buhari, who became the president after Goodluck Jonathan, and the slaughter went to a completely different level after that point. We said the same way we have spoken out against the Trump administration for its backing of al-Shara in Syria, where there's a slaughter of Christians there. We said the Obama supporters during that time got angry with us. We didn't care. Now the Trump supporters are getting angry with us. We still don't care because we don't care. We weren't coming for an administration. We weren't coming for a political party. We weren't none of those things. It wasn't that it was Obama. We were talking about the policy. It's not that it's Trump. We're talking about the policy. Christians are being slaughtered, as are Jews, Alawites, Kurds, as ISIS is being released from prisons en masse in Syria. And the president stands up and says, al-Shara is doing a great job. He's very handsome. He's a tough guy who comes from a rough background. We called the BS. And we are saying that what's actually happening is that they're being slaughtered, and no one knows that better than Israel, because my Israeli friends to the north are sending triage kits. They're sending food, helping. I didn't tell this story, Rabbi, at the time. I won't get into the details, but I'll just refer it to it. One of my Israeli friends who is involved in some of those relief efforts, that's what's going on in places like Sweda in Syria. They said, Dumisani, it is worse than October 7th. The slaughter, the burning, the destruction. She says to me, Dumisani, we had to send 5,000 morning after pills the first week. Let that sink in. I'm not going to go further than that. That's what's going on right now as we speak. The only nation doing anything to help relieve the suffering is the Jewish state of Israel. So the comments that I was making at that point, Rabbi Yaakov, is that we as pastors especially, we stand flat-footed in supporting Israel. Our closest ally, we stand right on the scriptures. We make no apologies for being Christian Zionists. We don't care who doesn't like it. And at the same time, we speak out against the slaughter, the persecution of Christians that has never happened before. And some of you may remember, it's about a month ago, maybe a little bit more than that, Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, was here in the States. He had a meeting with evangelical leaders in Florida. I was actually supposed to be at that meeting, but I had to be somewhere else. I saw the video later on. Our friends had shared it with us. And he sat there and he told those Christian leaders about Israel's commitment to, as much as it can, defend Christians around the world. He's this tiny nation. And the prime minister of the Jewish state of Israel, and he basically, I'm paraphrasing, he says, you all, meaning you Christian Zionists, have stood with us. We stand with you. We recognize that Christians are being killed at unprecedented levels, and we, meaning the state of Israel, are going to help and do all that we can to defend Israel. And I turned and pivoted and looked at my Christian pastor brothers and sisters. I said, if the Jewish state of Israel can make that kind of declaration while we, many of us as pastors, are silent about what's going on in Nigeria and Syria and other places like that, we will stand before God. And then I quoted some New Testament scriptures. We talked about the book of Revelation, chapter 12, the book of Revelation, chapter 6. Revelation, chapter 6, for you don't know, there's a actual scene in there which the Apostle John says that the souls of the martyrs cry out from beneath God's throne. And they ask God, how long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood. This is actually in the scriptures. And we said to them, God responds to those martyrs and he says, until the fullness of your other martyrs have been filled. In other words, when the number has reached its fullness, God says, then he will take vengeance. And I told them on that day, not the Tony Stark Avengers, Disneyland vengeance, real vengeance on all of those. Hezbollah, Hamas, Boko Haram, the Bible says God has their name and he's coming for them. So he said to them, as Christians, we have a dual track. We know that when the Messiah comes, he will judge the nations for how they came against Israel. And Christians are also taught he will also come against those who destroyed the Christians, those who called on the name of Jesus. There is a parallel track that's there that we must hold both of those things in our hearts and minds as Christians who stand with the Jewish state. So I yelled and screamed in the mic for a little while. Then I got down and I shook Caleb's hand and I went on to another meeting because there was other things that were going on. So Rabbi, that's basically what I talked about on that day at the conference.
And that is amazing. And I think it's an interesting segue because you talked about, right away what the persecution is, what's going on, and how that's affecting the work that you're doing through the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. But I wanted to ask, because we did talk about this, but I want everybody else to hear it. What that made you feel it was the right time to leave Christians United for Israel and focus your energies on entirely on IBSI?
There were two different things that happened. First of all, when we started IBSI, again in 2013, and spoke across the country, did churches and synagogues and universities and all of those things for about a year. And then until the time that David Brogg, who was then the executive director of CUFI, asked me to come on and help with the diversity outreach, the Black American, Hispanic, and those in terms of their inner workings. We did that. My wife and I talked about it. We prayed about it, and we felt that the timing was good, as long as we could maintain some of what we were still doing where the Black American community was concerned. Because I want to make this very, very clear. Like I talk about in my book, Zionism in the Black Church. I did this second edition, came out that same year of 21. As a Christian pastor, I'm always wanting to mention that it's not because we see the church as segregated. It's not a situation where as Christians we see there's a black church, white church, Hispanic church, Asian church, but there are cultural realities. There is a legacy, and that overarching thing is the deep, deep ties between Africa and Israel. We say in our organization, Rabbi, that the first Israel-Africa summit was when the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. No one can boast to a 3,000-year relationship with Israel other than Africa, right? And when the Bible says Cush, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't just mean the small state of Ethiopia we know today. It means the region, what we call Africa, which is why it often says Mitzrayim and Cush combined, which what we call Egypt and Israel, Egypt and Ethiopia, but it's talking about what we would basically refer to as the continent of Africa. That's what's actually happening, and that's who the Queen of Sheba actually represented. So short answer to your question now, Rabbi, it was in May of 21, or during that year, back to politics. This was the first year of the Biden administration. And one of the first things that it did is it began to flood Hamas with billions of dollars. During the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, the Taylor Force Act was passed, which made it illegal for us to fund Palestinian Authority that had anything to do with paying martyrs. Trump had also cut the funding to UNRWA. It was a great debilitation when it came to Palestinian terrorism against Israel. When the Biden administration came in, it opened the floodgates, and it was as if it was the third intifada. Along with that was the propaganda. And one of those tools of propaganda was the Marxist group Black Lives Matter. We began to talk about that organization back in 2014, a year after it was founded, 2013, ironically the same year that we started the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. We began to call out the danger signs from the very beginning because we saw the same markings from the PLO. That here they were in Ferguson, Missouri after the shooting of Mike Brown, and next thing you see are Palestinian flags, and we called foul. We said, if you're going to deal with police brutality, if you're going to deal with injustices, that's fine. That has nothing to do with what's going on in Gaza, 8,000 miles away from here. We saw what that actually was. And what was happening for us was that we were getting more and more calls to come and speak and share and do. As IBSI, though I was still on staff with CUFI, the messaging was not the same. This was not an argument or some sort of negative thing where Diana Hagee is Dr. John Hagee's wife. She's the first lady of their church, but also one of the directors of Kufi. We're dear friends of our family. We sat down. It was with heavy heart. We recognized that in order for me to continue to answer this call, I could not do it. It was not going to be feasible for Kufi to have their diversity outreach coordinator, who's an African American, very outspoken man, say what he needed to say. First of all, I didn't want it to look like there was a white evangelical telling me to say something. I'm a grown man. I'll say what I want to say. They have nothing to do with John Hagee. But secondly, it was not going to help Kufi in terms of what its purview was. So it was better to part company and for us to do what it is we were going to do as IBSI and not as Kufi.
It's interesting because, Coalition for Jewish Values, I get the question all the time. There are other Orthodox Jewish organizations, and they have their mission, and their mission is advocacy for the needs of the community. They have to keep themselves silent on certain things. And we are all about speaking up for what our values are, regardless of who wants to hear it and who doesn't want to hear it. And by the way, before I go further, I want to make sure that everybody knows, go ahead and use the chat feature. Type your question in the chat if you have a question for Pastor Washington, and we will try to get to it because, I think it's really important that you're here. I mean, obviously, Black Lives Matter and other things created a fissure really between the Jewish community and the Black community. There's really been some damage there. And our topic here is about, healing that and reconciling that. And, obviously I think you are a one-man healing force in that venture, obviously, because you're recognizing, here's the Israelis, they're doing what they can for Africa, and Africa is reciprocating. Over there, they're getting the Black community and then the Israeli community getting along great. It's America that there's a problem about that. And I think the fact that you're speaking out and telling people the truth is really important on both sides. And I just wanted to see, if you want to talk about the mission and how that works together.
Sure. And I saw the hand there too. So I'll come to that in a second. I'll answer your question, Rabbi. So our organization, and we put I'm sorry, my brain is doing this. Your mission statement. It's there on our website, ibsi.org. You can go there. You can see a lot of our information and our articles. And the article that I referred to is Africa Israel Weekly. That's the name of our Substack. So if you go to ibsi.org, you can scroll down. You'll see videos. You'll see Africa Israel Weekly and articles. And we bring the receipts for whatever it is that we're sharing. We bring the information so that people know the background of it, so they can, because first and foremost, our mission is empowerment. It is information, it's education, it's empowerment for, first and foremost, the Black American and then the African leadership community, right? Whether they're pastors, community leaders, that type of thing. Not that we exclude, we can talk with anybody. We go to synagogues, we talk to all kinds of different groups. But again, our primary focus is the Black American community because the call, there's both the spiritual part and then the geopolitical, and I'll say something about that in a second. So the mission then is to defend Israel's right to exist, to also defend what we call the historic Black struggle for freedom. I talk about that a lot in my book, that Israel's enemies, particularly beginning in the late 1960s, chose a specific track when it came to propaganda against Israel, and that track was the exploitation of the Black community. This is why they chose to call Israel a racist state, an apartheid state. They used those buzzwords on purpose because those words had great meaning, not just for my people in terms of Black Americans or for my African brothers and sisters, but they also were triggering for those who did not know. Like I said, for these young people who are from the river to the sea, they don't know which river, they don't know which sea, and they couldn't find Gaza if they had a GPS and a map, right? But what they've been told is to respond to certain stimuli, and that was driven by race. Dr. King was assassinated in April of 1968. It was 1969 that Yasser Arafat became the chairman of the PLO. And what was his very, very clear goal? Reach out to the leaders of the Black American and African communities and disparage Israel as a racist regime. He hit it early, he hit it often, and it worked like a charm because people who know nothing about the conflict think that Israel is racist, think that Israel's an apartheid state. They know nothing about it, but it was a messaging. And we said, even like on the campuses, Students for Justice in Palestine and the Muslim Students Association and all these other Hamas-aligned groups have nothing about Palestine, nothing about liberation, nothing about freedom. They would have no audience whatsoever until they form quote-unquote coalitions with one specific group, the Black Student Union. Why? They have to stand next to Black young people to make people think that what they're saying is true. This was Yasser Arafat's plan with the PLO. For those of you who know about the PLO, it was formed by the KGB in 1964. In 1964, when Israel didn't have any access to Judea and Samaria, so what in the hell were they liberating? Absolutely nothing. It was always a Nazi call to destroy Israel. They couldn't gain traction, but once Yasser Arafat came in and stood next to Black leaders, parroting that stuff, again, it was never successful in making the majority of the Black community anti-Israel. That has never happened. People often will ask me that question. Why are Black people anti-Israel? They're now more anti-Israel than some of the other groups, right? What the issue is that the perception was that anti-Israel mentality was a civil rights movement. That was the goal. And for those who question it, I want to ask you, when these campuses were on fire post October 7th, my question, were they HBCUs or were they predominantly white campuses? I'll answer it for you. It's B. It was Harvard. It was Yale. It was Columbia. It was UCLA. It was Michigan, where there's less than 2% Black population. Why? Because the goal was never the Black community. It was to make other people think that Israel was the aggressor. That was always the point. So one of the things our organization does, among many, is defend that legacy. That has never been, it was never, anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian propaganda was never organic to the Black community. It was something that was imported, which is what Black Lives Matter was. They may have had black skin, but what they were talking about in connecting police brutality to Israel had nothing to do with the interests of the Black community. That was serving Hamas. That was serving Qatar, and it was the same exploitation that started back in the 1960s. That has been much of our mantra. I'll say this last thing too. One of the other questions I'm often asked as well is, how are you all received? How you all responded to? Overwhelmingly positive. See, when we are in Black churches, in Black neighborhoods, in Black communities, and we're having these conversations with leaders, pastors, mothers, fathers, 90-something% of the time, the response is, thank you for that. I did not know that. I was not aware of that. Or I did know that. I'd forgotten about that, depending on what generation they come from. And again, our goal then is empowerment, to not let their voices be hijacked by people who are not concerned with freedom, not even concerned with the Palestinians, right? They're concerned with destroying Israel.
That's really interesting. The point, especially the point you made about the HBCUs. Like, I would have thought of that and said, you know what? They're focusing on those colleges because there's a lot of Jews on those colleges. The white ones, I'm saying. The Harvards and the Columbias. More Jews there are, the more anti-Semitism there is. But you're making a very different, very valid point. It's just like the Black community really has no tolerance for this. That's built in. I mean, obviously the same thing goes, most Muslims are not really out for this kind of stuff, and they're not as hateful. And yet CARE is the most prominent voice in the Islamic community in America. Yes. In the same way that they're using Black Lives Matter and these other movements to make anti-Semitism a whole lot bigger than it is. What do you think? How is your reception when you go into the HBCUs and you speak there?
It's funny. It's been a while since I've gone. What we're doing right now, as we speak, I just talked to my wife. This is our secret, so don't tell anybody this yet. But we are working on a whole HBCU college tour. There's a young man who lives in Israel. He's Black American, but he converted to Judaism years ago. He's over a couple of different organizations, and we are now partnering with them to begin to take HBCU students and administration to the Holy Land. We're already working on it right now. There'll be several trips that will be happening later on this year. And what we have found, whether it's been our organization or others, you would have to understand. I'll do this succinctly. Dr. King was asked some of these same questions, and I recommend for anybody who hasn't done it yet, if you go to rabbinical.assembly.org, Dr. King was the keynote speaker at the 68th annual convention for the Rabbinical Assembly. This was on March 25th, 1968, literally 10 days before he's killed. 10 days before he's killed, one of his last public meetings is with rabbis, Rabbi Heschel, and the other leading rabbis at that time who were within part of the civil rights movement and other areas. And one of the questions that he was asked, ladies and gentlemen, and it's fascinating because you have to remember what you're reading. It's 1968, the Vietnam War is raging. This is was Johnson was hoping to be a re-election year for him. There was a lot of things that were going on. John F. Kennedy had been assassinated 3 years before. Malcolm X a couple of years before that. And of course, then Dr. King would be assassinated a few days after that. This is one of the most volatile times in the history of our nation, right? So one of the things they're talking about is Black-Jewish relations. But I want to make this very, very clear when you're reading it. It's in context. The rabbis are asking Dr. King about some of the anti-Semitism they're hearing coming from the younger members of the civil rights movement, the Stokely Carmichaels, who became Kwame Ture, the Angela Davises. They don't name Angela Davis by name, but they're referring to this group. Now, here's what you have to understand. They're not asking Dr. King about what anti-Semitism is. They know what that is. They're very, very well versed. They have just never heard it coming from the Black community, right? They had never, you go back to Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald in the early 1900s, these guys who architect the Rosenwald schools, there have been Black-Jewish synergy for decades, right? Post-Civil War, right? And they had never heard. They knew what anti-Semitism was. They knew what Jew hatred was, all of these things. So the rabbis are asking Dr. King because it's strange to them. And what he begins to tell them is what I'm telling you now. It is completely inorganic to the Black community. He says, he begins to talk about what's happened. He called them the young militant members of the civil rights movement. These are the younger ones. Remember, Dr. King was only 39 years old. It wasn't like he was an old man. But in terms of the movement that had him begin in the 20s, he was the elder statesman. So to him, Eldridge Cleaver, the Black Panthers, Dr. King was old. See what I'm saying? And they began to speak somewhat disrespectfully of the Dr. Kings and the Bayard Russels. Why? Because these people were hungry. They were tired of this slow drag and this slow movement for change. They wanted it by any means necessary. So there was tension within the Black community, but the anti-Semitism was completely new. And where was it coming from? I already told you from. It was coming from the PLO. We have pictures of Yasser Arafat standing next to Eldridge Cleaver, standing next to Angela Davis. He began to feed what was he saying? He said, the same way these white people are being racist to you, that's what these Israelis are doing to us. It was a complete lie what he was saying was going on in Israel. But again, it worked for people who were not aware of what was going on the ground. The reason I share that with you is that the same thing here today. Do you have pro-Palestinian sentiment on HBCU campus? Absolutely. You have all kinds of sentiments that are there. Are you having Black students on those campuses take over the quad and take over the president? No, none of that stuff. Can I be real? Can I be really honest? That's happening to these white liberal kids on these campuses here. That exclusively, right? It is not, they would never have any of it. Can I give you guys a little bit of history? Do you know that when Jews began to flee Nazi Europe, those that were professors were welcomed into the HBCUs as professors, where some of the white colleges would not have them? We have pictures of Einstein teaching all Black men students in college. That synergy has always been there. That's what Israel's enemies were trying to tap into, both in Africa and Israel and in the United States. Now I'm done.
That's amazing stuff. We have a question from well, actually, we have a couple of questions about other groups to work with. Like, who can, if somebody says, I want to do outreach, into the Black community, I want to try to create better relationships, who could they be talking to? See, David asked it as extending our conversation to the Black community. Robert asked specifically about something called the African Jewish Alliance. I don't know if that's a familiar name to you. Mm-hmm. But, what sort of groups that you find are going to be most responsive when somebody says, I want to work on this area to improve things?
In terms of groups and organizations, there are different ones. For example, a colleague of mine, former colleague of mine, I'm going to mess up the name of the organization, Darius Jones. And many of you know who he is, and he has an organization. I can't remember the name of the organization right now. Please forgive me. He used to be with AIPAC. I met him years ago through my daughter-in-law, my daughter-in-law, blessed memory, Olga. He does a great deal of Black-Jewish relations, takes trips to Israel. It's a Black empowerment organization. That's almost the name of it, but I can't remember the exact name. So I highly recommend what he does and that you tap into that so you can learn more about that as well. There are strategic pastors that we work with across the country. that we have their names and information, so that as they are working with other rabbis and other leaders within the Jewish community. So we recommend when our Jewish brothers and sisters ask us that question, we provide for them information about either some of the pastors that we are working with, organizations that we know of. They're now small in terms of organizations, meaning that there are, other than Darius's and maybe one other one that I can't remember, we are the only Black-owned, Black-led organizations, either for-profit or nonprofit, that do this type of work. Again, that's just a reality. What I can also tell you is that as an older person in this space now, over the last several years, we've met a growing number of both Black Americans and African young people who are now beginning to start their own initiatives when it comes to either Black Jewish Synergy or Israel Africa Synergy and everything. So again, to answer that question, there are pastors and leaders that we work with that have great relationship with the Jewish community and vice versa. And so we're willing to share that information via email. And then there are a couple of other organizations like the one with Darius Jones that does amazing work when it comes to the Black Jewish communities as well.
I think it's important to give the URL of, to reach out to Pastor Washington and find, like David's asking, the names of individual pastors. IBSI-now.org is the organization's website. The Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, IBSI-now.org. Yeah, there you go. Dumisani just put the address in for anybody who wants. info@IBSI-now.org. To get that information. Barbara asks a good question. She says, over 60 years ago, that's Arafat. But at a certain point, the NAACP, which was founded by Jews, falls completely into the Black Lives Matter narrative. Let's be honest here. The Reform movement within Judaism also completely fell in with Black Lives Matter. The ADL fell in with Black Lives Matter. And all of these... for a while, Black Lives Matter, they hid their hatred, even though if you knew where to look. Patrisse Cullors, who was one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, she famously commented back at the beginning, like in 2015, she said, if we can't stop this colonialist experiment called Israel, we're doomed. Her priority was not Black Americans. Her priority was not Black lives. Her priority was, let's destroy Israel. Because Israel is a threat to civilization like nothing else. So Barbara's asking, the NAACP has now mainstreamed BLM and Black Power movements, and how do we fix that problem? And did they never get the synergy meme? They fell into this Arafat narrative. What do we do to get NAACP on one side and Black Lives Matter on the other?
Well, Rabbi, I'm glad you began partially answering the question by saying that this was a problem that was political, not racial. ADL, for example, we refrain as much as we possibly can from ever contradicting or coming against in any way any of our Jewish brothers and sisters in the organizations, either Israel or Jews, not because we think they're wallflowers, but because there's enough of that out there. We're not going to give Al Jazeera any talking points. Having said that, we have had to take the ADL to task a couple of times along these types of things, doing things that were directly damaging to the Black and Jewish communities. I'm going to give you one example. When Kyrie Irving a couple of years ago posted a link to the Hebrew to Negroes film in which we talked about that, and I've done a lot of work with the Black Hebrew Israelites. That goes back. I've been aware of those different groups since the 1990s. Much of this for me started some 30 years ago, right? But what was unhelpful was when ADL stepped in to tongue lash Kyrie Irving, which we understood he has a responsibility as a world figure. He's on the NBA, all those things. But at the same time, they promoted Black Lives Matter all over the NBA on their basketball courts, right? Black Lives Matter has been very, very outspoken against Israel and the Jewish people, very, very pro-Hamas, right? So we were saying there was double-minded, it was two-faced, it was harmful. So we had to call those types of things out, right? So to answer your question, Rabbi, yes, NAACP, we even called out the statement that was made this was shortly after October 7th, and there were some pastors and Black pastors who were featured in New York Times, and they were making a statement. They were calling for a ceasefire and everything. We had to point out in our article the political maneuvering that was going on with that type of thing. Well, I'm gonna have to unpack that a little bit more for you, because it wasn't It wasn't what the media was attempting to present. Let me say it that way, right? And so, yes, what we found is that the legacy organizations, whether that's in the NAACP or the ADL, the others, who find themselves on, respectfully, the wrong side of this issue based on what's really going on the ground, we call it out. Respectfully, we call it out. Right? And that's what we need to do. This is what has been the case. I'm going to give you a quick little story. 1975, 74, I think it was 74. 74 was when Yasser Arafat addressed the United Nations General Assembly. By now, he had been in power as the PLO chairman for about 5-6 years or so. He was beginning to gain traction. I told you his main strategy was go to the black leaders and try to get people to think that this was a black movement, which it was not, never was, never has been. He stood up at the General Assembly and he talked about Israel. He said Israel and racism so many different times. Bayard Rustin, who was one of the founders of what's called BASIC, Black Americans to Support Israel Committee. It was a pro-Israel, a black Zionist organization founded in 1975. Dr. King had already been assassinated, but the members were Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, Coretta Scott King, Daddy King, some 200 other, who's a Leontine Price, Arthur Ashe, you name it. These are black leaders who joined this organization to defend Israel and also defend the black struggle for freedom, right? Bayard Rustin writes an article, and the title of it is The PLO, Terrorists or Freedom Fighters. And he cites not Farrakhan, talk about that too. He cites Arafat's speech at the United Nations General Assembly. He said that he said Israel and racism so many times, as is the KGB propaganda, that even some of the other black leaders began to believe it. He said it was always false. He just kept doing word association, right? And in that article, one of the things that Bayard Rustin pointed out, ladies and gentlemen, again, 1975, he pointed out that the real racism in that region were in places like Sudan, where they're being slaughtered. This was 40 years ago. Fast forward to now, what does the United Nations say is the most, the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet? Sudan. Nothing has changed. What was it? Solomon said nothing new under the sun? Right. He actually addressed the very reality that was still a reality, I say 40, 50 years ago, right? And the point that I'm making is this. He called out other black leaders. It wasn't many of them, right? But he began to speak as a black person in the civil rights movement to say, this is a miscarriage of justice. Not only is Israel not doing what Yasser Arafat is saying he's doing, Yasser Arafat is slaughtering Palestinians. Yasser Arafat elected himself. The very things that we say about Hamas right now is what Fatah was doing then. And it was black leaders. And let me say this last thing. Black leaders have always been at the forefront of this struggle. Do you know that Bayard Rustin also challenged the United Nations? And he told them, I can almost say it verbatim. He said, if the United Nations continues to give a wink and a nod to the PLO, meaning all the terrorism that they're visiting against the Israelis, he says we will soon have an untold number of organizations with grievances against society. Do you know it was black leaders who called out global terrorism before it even happened? He was a prophet. He said as long as the United Nations continues to ignore what the PLO is doing to the Israelis, we will have this happening all over the world. He was 100% correct.
It is due to Palestinian terrorism that we all have to go through a humiliating checkpoint in order to board an airplane. Absolutely. And people ignore that. People, and that's I think sort of the last question is the interface with the Black Muslim community. I mean, people are, they want to hear what they want to hear, not what the truth is. The entire northern coast of Africa, the top real estate in the world, the Mediterranean coast, delightful place to be, except that it's entirely under Arab control, and a lot of people can't go there. It's like, they're talking about Jews in the slave trade. Why do you think there's no blacks left in Algeria and in Morocco and in Tangiers and Libya? I mean, it's like, why are these all Arab dominated? But so what do you what do you say to the Black Muslim community about bringing them around, or is it sort of a lost cause?
This is another one that has to be really, really very specific. So I mentioned I had a Freudian slip, but I said Farrakhan instead of Arafat. I know those names sound the same, but there's a very, very dual thing there. Um, and there's so many different iterations. And let me say this right now: we have on our so people can have their own resources. IBSI.org. If you go to our YouTube page, one of our playlists is a series of short videos called "We Are Not the Same: How Free Palestine Exploited the Black Community." It's 7 episodes, right? You can look at them out 1 to 2 minutes each, right? Actually, we're working on a book with that same title that should probably be released later on this year, right? But I'm saying this for a reason so that as I'm sharing this with you, again, we are all about empowerment. So we want to make sure not just the people that's listening to what we say, but they're able to read it and verify it. I'm from that Christian pastor background. When Paul, he commended the Berean church, he said, you didn't just listen to me, you went and you researched what I was said, and then you found out for yourself. So I want you to understand this very clearly. When it comes to when you say the quote unquote black Muslim community, there are different iterations of that. If you're talking about, for example, the Nation of Islam, from the days of Elijah Muhammad and then on with Louis Farrakhan, it has always been very, very anti-Israel, very, very anti- Semitic. Now, people play games. Oh, it's not anti-Israel. It's the same game that they're playing with Tucker Carlson. I told people Tucker Carlson is just a white right-wing Louis Farrakhan. They're the same person that just wanted to do it from different perspectives in terms of the political aisle, right? That has been a real source of anti-Israel sentiment that's directed at black leaders and then beyond. Again, has it ever taken hold and become a majority view? No. But it has been a consistently anti-Israel view. And here's the thing. It has also been a pro-Islamist view. Minister Louis Farrakhan over the Nation of Islam has been aware of the enslavement of black Africans for decades. And not only has he not ever said anything about it, he has said the opposite. He has run interference for the slave owners, telling people literally there is no slavery in Sudan. I am not joking with you. This has been going on for decades. One of the things that we've had to call out, when someone calling those types of things out, we've had to call those types of things out. In those instances where the Nation of Islam has done very positive things within the black community, we've given them their props. And when it's been something very negative, we've also spoken out about that as well. Why? Because we're going to speak out. We're going to speak truth to power. And when it comes to the issue of the Arab enslavement, for those who are not aware, there has been an Arab systematic enslavement and subjugation of Africans for nearly 1,400 years since the 7th century. After the death of Muhammad, Islam spread in less than a century from the deserts of Arabia all the way to Morocco and that part of the northwestern part of Africa and up into the Mediterranean. And in that wake was not just the trans-Saharan slave trade of black Africans, but the castration of, to your point, Rabbi, one of the reasons why you don't have large numbers of Africans in those regions is because that slave trade also castrated those men. Millions more traded in the trans-Saharan slave trade than even in the transatlantic slave trade, right? The transatlantic slave trade, which started in the 1600s, ended in the late 1800s. The trans-Saharan slave trade started in the late 7th century and continues to this day. There are some 2 million Africans still enslaved throughout the Arab Islamic world to this day, right? And the Louis Farrakhan, who's had the largest voice, particularly since the 1990s on this issue, has run interference for people like Omar Bashir, who's a former president of Sudan, and others for decades. In 1994 was a pivotal year for Africa and the diaspora. And I can give you an example, quick little history lesson for everyone. 1994, I won't ask for a show of hands because we don't have much time. 1994, boom, the year that Nelson Mandela was elected as the first black South African president. 1994, boom, the Rwandan genocide, same year. 3, the Million Man March in Washington, D.C., all happened in the same year. Global attention was on Africa and the African diaspora. In the Million Man March, several former slaves and persecuted Africans from Mauritania and Sudan pleaded with Louis Farrakhan to allow them a couple of moments at the podium to tell Black America about the slave trade. He refused. He ignored them. And then he went on a tour telling everybody that they were lying. That's the reality. It is that. Now, you talk about the Black Muslim, that part, yes. Black Muslims in general? No. Do you know that some of Israel's greatest friends in particularly West Africa are African Muslims? Do you know there's a whole African Muslim Zionist movement? Do you know that African Muslims visit Israel on a regular basis? Much of the West would never know that, but that happens on a regular basis, right? But what we're talking about now, this jihadist mentality, much of it imported from the PLO, this is what we're talking about. This is why Yasser Arafat and Louis Farrakhan were such good friends ideologically. And when you see it, you see how it was attacked. Yasser Arafat did it from the PLO standpoint to come against the black community. And Louis Farrakhan did it as a black person running cover while denying that people like that look like me and him are enslaved all over the region. And then again, he said that it wasn't true. That's still having effects today. I'll say this last little story, just a little tidbit of information. 1995, shortly after the Million Man March, my dear friend Charles Jacobs, who is over an organization that actually helps free slaves in places like Sudan, we've been working with him for a very long time. They had a workshop that they presented at Howard University. We have these videos loaded up. You can click on it and look at it. And there were several African men, Muslim and Christian, who were telling these students and the attendees of this seminar about their plight. That's how we found out about the Million Man March, because they told them about it at that point. Do you know that when they began to take question and answers from the audience, one of the first questions was from a young undergraduate by the name of Ta-Nehisi Coates. He was an undergraduate at Howard University. And he asked the question of the panel about the slavery that was happening. And he asked that question in the context of Louis Farrakhan denying it. Here, this young Ta-Nehisi Coates was about 20, 21 years old at this time. And he was asking the question saying, Louis Farrakhan is saying this. I hear you all are saying this. What are we to do? This was the complex. He was flummoxed already at that time, some 30 years ago at that time, right? This is what was hanging in the balance over 30 years ago.
Which is an amazing thing. It's an amazing way to close. Like what happened to him, you know? But it's interesting, you know, in the same way that IBSI, like you said, you don't tell the Jewish community how to think. You have to fight within the black community. I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. You know, it's like CJB has to do the work within the Jewish community. We are definitely speaking truth to the power with regards to the ADL and such groups. And, you know, I'll leave people with a tidbit that they may not know, that the leaders of the Reform movement, the Reconstructionist movement, and the Conservative movement are all late this month, and just in a week or two, are going to be appearing at the latest conference of J Street, which is the anti-Israel Jewish organization. And their headliner is going to be Al Sharpton, to make it look like they got diversity. You know, Al Sharpton was one of the inciters of the Crown Heights riots, just absolutely never a friend of the Jewish community. We need to create more opportunities for people like Dumisani to be talking to, you know, to this crowd, and that people should understand what the reality is. Ali just put some really helpful links into the chat, both about the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel and Coalition for Jewish Values. I had dropped in the donation link because our ability to run webinars like this, develop relationships like this, I mean, obviously our work is criticizing the Jewish partners who are taking, you know, the wrong attitude, like the ADL, when it comes to black partnerships and everything else, but also working with politicians like the very up and coming Byron Daniels down in Florida, who's got an amazing career ahead of him, as not just leading in the black community, leading in the American political community, and really bringing us to a better place. And I think that it's, you know, this is your opportunity. Go ahead and click that button, everybody. Make sure that you send in a contribution to Coalition for Jewish Values so we can keep this type of thing going. Pastor Washington, you know, it's always just a great privilege to have you with us. And, you know, I'm going to ask you if you have any closing comments, because we kind of ended on Ta-Nehisi Coates, and, you know, but I want to let you make your closing remark and pitch to our community, and then we'll close it out.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So I see there's this is all visible to everyone. Barbara Rombowitz asked a question here. A very pointed question. I'm so glad. I just happened to scroll and see it because I see there's been things that are on there. And if you don't see it, and I'm not embarrassed, Barbara, I'm assuming since you placed it on here, it's okay to read. She says, besides being platformed and funded by Jews to say that blacks shouldn't hate Israel and tell Jews that he thinks Israel has a right to defend itself, what is DW and his group doing to help Jews? I think that's kind of funny. Number one, our funding comes from both the Jewish and the black community. I want to make that very, very clear. So it's not, we're not platformed by Jews, and if that's an implication of anything, we are very much, we do receive funding from our Jewish brothers and sisters, and we very much appreciate it, but we also from black pastors and leaders as well. Secondly, what we do first and foremost is empowerment and education. But beyond that, the advocacy part, we build networks. I just got off the plane from Addis Ababa 4 days ago, where we hosted our first ever Young Leaders Conference of African and Black American leaders. They came from Rwanda, Uganda, they came from Nigeria, came from Ghana, and they also came from the Black Americans who are part of our, what we call IBSI ambassadors. And why were we there? We were there to discuss the future of Africa and the diaspora. We are operating on what's called Vision 2050 in our organization, which means that according to Gallup and other measurements, Africa will be the largest population on the planet, some 2.1 to 2.5 billion people by 2050. Right? It's also the largest Christian population, the largest Muslim population, and the fastest growing. It is the youngest continent on the planet. 70% of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, is 30 years and younger. This means that, among other things, Christian Zionism, which is the largest support for Israel outside of the Jewish community, will be rooted in Africa and the diaspora. And so we came to discuss what that is, what Pan-Africanism means, both in the spiritual and political sense, about what's going on their continent. We came to talk about extremism, how there is no place on the planet, according to the Global Terrorism Index, Africa is the #1 hotspot when it comes to terrorism. And that shifted in 2020 from the Middle East to Africa. We sat down with these young people to talk about what we need to do, how we chart this course, how anti-Semitism does destroy societies. We let them know that the West should be a cautionary tale to them, because in all of these things and attempting to wrap our arms around and ignore stuff like jihadism that's spreading on our campuses and across our society, that they needed to be aware of those things. They were talking about enterprise. The speakers were African, they were Israeli, they were American. It was an amazing moment. They are already organizing their second conference, which will be in Jerusalem. They are already beginning to form their networks, including their own financing. They are building their own financial network that will help empower them to do the work that they need to do both in their countries and different parts of the world. They were extremely inspired. They heard speakers from places like Save a Child's Heart, which, for those of you who don't know, they perform heart surgeries for children all over the world, especially in Africa. And one of their recent interns who just graduated from their program is an Ethiopian surgeon, heart surgeon, who was there to speak to them. They heard these comments and these discussions over the 2 days. They heard about African Zionism. They heard about how the Jewish community in South Africa helped Nelson Mandela destroy the apartheid system the same way that they did here, the Jim Crow system. They learned things they'd never heard before. They heard from elders they never heard from before. It was an amazing moment. As the spiritual part of it, I'm going to say this as a Christian pastor, the Spirit of God fell in that place. It was amazing. We build networks and we empower. That's what we do. And I'll tell you, when it comes to social media, about 30% of what we do is on social media. If you really know what you do, you have to come with us. I invite you. Our next forum, we host a forum on Israel, Africa, and Black America in different parts of the country. The next one is in the DMV area, Maryland. We're going to be there in April. I believe it's the 18th. Send it to me. The links will be up there and everything. Now, it's exclusive in terms of we only have 25. We only allow 25 Black pastors and leaders to come because of the information that we share. We want to make sure that we have it in a workshop format. But if anybody on this call wants to come and observe, email me personally. I'll make sure you can be able. You have to pay your own way to get there. We have no problem. There's no secrets. We let people. No one is doing what we're doing. No one. And the results are manifest. We are being contacted by young Black Americans and Africans from all over, thanking us for what we're saying, thanking us for the education, and starting their own initiatives. So, all due respect, Ms. Barbara, we're not funded by Jews to tell Black folks to be nice to Jewish people.
No, look, the voice is actually really important. It's not about the Jews telling Jews that Blacks don't hate the Jewish community. It's that you're telling the Black community that Blacks don't hate the Jewish community the same way that we're talking to Jews. It's very, very, very important sometimes having a voice. Thank you, everybody. This has been remarkable. We blasted through the hour because when you get Pastor Washington, one thing you do not get is quiet. And you don't get reticence. You get a man with a really powerful voice who's done a really lot to help the community. Again, please support our efforts. I can put that link in the chat. Again, just go ahead and click that link. You'll still hear us. And that way you can continue supporting our efforts as we go forward. But at the same time, I just want to say again, like a really deep thanks. Again, Pastor Washington, a friend of mine for a decade now. He's also friends. Charles Jacobs and the Jewish Leadership Project was mentioned above. Another great organization. It's like anybody who's hanging out with myself and Charles Jacobs, they're doing good work. Okay, it's like the ultimate Jewish. You don't need the stamp of approval. You just know they're doing good work already. But Pastor Wyden's amazing stuff. Again, it's info at. Oh, there it is in the chat at ibsi-now.org. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. This has been a really remarkable session. Looking forward. Our next one is March 15th, I